I'm delighted to introduce our first provocation by Degard. Degard is a pioneering British painter of auras, writer, researcher, curator, and founder of the genre contemporary visionary. She is also the owner of the Visionary Brick Museum. The Visionary Brick Museum is a red telephone box outside of the British Museum, which hosts visionary art exhibitions exclusively. The Visionary Brick Museum is the smallest gallery in London. In this talk, she will explain her doctoral work and discuss a practice that refers to the limitations of our current scientific paradigm and much more. So over to you, Degard.
Oh, thank you so much. It is so lovely to see you and to see old friends on Zoom. Thank you so much for inviting me. I feel really honoured and privileged. I like the idea that we've got the vibe of the aura of a bouncy castle here. I'm not sure I'll be continuing that aura in my talk, but yeah, thank you ever so much, and long may it continue. So I will start. Everyone can see my screen?
Yes.
Oh, brilliant, fantastic. I'm just going to kind of get rid of my face because that's such a distraction, isn't it, when you're sort of talking at yourself. So this talk is called The Visionary Genre in Art, Magical Hearings and Signs from Heaven. And hopefully those, by the end of it, you'll go, yeah, she covered that. What I'm going to be discussing is the artistic eye, whispering from the deep past, Gilgul and inner hauntings. I'm going to hope that my computer sends me to the next slide. So this is unfinished, but it's the beginnings, if you like, of my doctoral work in painting. It's taken me quite a long time to get to this point. This painting is 4 foot by 8 foot and is one of what will become many versions of this. I'm using the structure of the Wailing Wall, and each row or course I will be discussing in detail. Each course relates to different aspects of thinking and research that I've done. So it's a sort of varying cosmology. I'd be very interested to get people's views on that cosmology, because I might just shift all the rows around, if you like, at some point, and in different paintings do different things. But in this particular painting, the first row course is the aura of God, and the man is praying to God. The second is the invisibles or intermediary beings, which I'll be discussing more in this talk. The third is materiality. Then we have landscape, people, the Aryan, and heaven. And this talk is going to be mainly focused on the invisibles and Aryanism. Jumping straight in to very frightening topics. So this is some early writings on racial supremacy. In 1855, a French aristocrat, Arthur de Gobineau, published an essay on the inequality of the human races. Gobineau divides the human species into 3 major groupings: white, yellow, and black, with each race having their own qualities, but white being the highest quality. Gobineau came to believe race created culture. He argued that distinctions, black, white, and yellow, were natural barriers, and therefore race mixing, i.e. interracial relationships, leads to chaos in society. His context, if you like, was that he'd lost his whole aristocratic life as a result of the French Revolution of 1789. And he was trying to probably validate or come up with an idea of why this had happened as an aristocrat who, he was frankly a bit of a hopeless guy as well. So he further subdivides Aryan and non-Aryan, with the Aryan race as the pinnacle of human development and the basis for all European aristocracies. So hence you see where his why he's coming to that conclusion. The origin of Aryan as a superior race in what is now, it's basically the Aryan person, the Superman, was actually supposed to have originated in Iran. As you can probably sense, Aryanism is, and this notion of the Superman is actually a mythology. There's very little evidence of actually even a specific origin race, let alone obviously a superior race. It's just hopeless, dodgy logic. And the reason that I wanted to show you this is because this essay led directly to Mein Kampf by Adolf Hitler, and Gobineau is referenced in Mein Kampf in 1925. I also wanted to give you a little bit of historical context with Charles Darwin, who wrote The Origin of Species only 4 years later. And this is the front cover of the original edition, which says the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. I absolutely hate that phrase, that there is an idea of a favored race. And as we know, this Darwin's notions of the evolution of mankind forms a basis for much theory today, economics, business, politics. It's all supposed to be about a struggle. Returning back to Gobineau, I feel like what was created at this point in time was a type of secular cosmology where you've got the downfall of humanity in terms of, you know, revolutions in this case, in his view, and where we had Adam and Eve and a snake and an apple, it's converting into a secular story of the downfall of humanity and why this might be happening to humanity. Gobineau's thinking leads directly to the little girl crying. And this is one of my paintings. It's a collage, and it's part of the Wailing Wall Revisited. This little girl is actually in Auschwitz. She's obviously about to be murdered. The coloration around her is her aura, but she sits within this idealized landscape that I've created with inspiration from an outsider artist called Henry Darger, with the idea that, you know, that the pain of all of this wobbly logic is actually potentially unnecessary, hopefully. So moving on, how do I get the credentials to discuss all of this? As Leela just mentioned, this is my Visionary Brit Museum, and I'm very much hoping that those of you on this call will contact me afterwards. Leela is certainly going to be showing at the Visionary Brit. I welcome all visionary ideas. At the moment, we have Professor Tom McLeish, Dr. Alan Rayner, Professor Faye Brower, who'll be just talking on the 20th of May alongside of June at the Spirituality and Music event at Middlesex University, myself and another artist called Janet Sard Cook. But the reason that I feel that I've got the credentials is because of my background. My parents are Jewish. I find it very difficult to say that I am Jewish. I find it just almost like it's just very, very difficult. And the family are Holocaust survivors in the sense that they didn't survive from a concentration camp, but 90% of the family were killed in concentration camps. And my grandmother managed to escape Germany in 1939. So hence why I am here. And I feel a lot of resonance from that time, which is why this is pertinent and personal as well to me. So I just a further thought on the idea of taking out the word racial and just the notion of supremacy. I think it's a problematic notion in all of its ideology, where you've got, money, you've got rich being better than poor, which in my view is hopeless as an idea. I had some very, very happy times with my grandparents who had very little money, and I don't agree with that. And also the idea of supremacy that you've got within groups of people. There's a lot of that there are deep nuances within groups of people, and therefore supremacy as such is very problematic. But the question is, how can this notion of, in fact, in this case, racial supremacy, be attacked, combated using visionary experiences and visionary art? So the first is that I'd like to discuss is the artistic eye, which is a very in an almost prosaic conversation about paint. This is an app, and this face is actually an identical face with a change of color and a change of eyebrow shape and eyelash, and that's pretty much it. And there's a very slight changes of shadow, but more or less not. And what you can see in the face is just a sort of changing of palette, a changing of with the black girl, you've got this sort of dark shade here, but so with white, so with in Indian Asian, so with East Asian, and you've got the kind of the shadowing and the lightness in all the facial parts, and therefore you can't actually describe as an artist, when you're painting a portrait, you would never have that white, black, yellow, whatever silly division, because you're creating a you're mixing paint to create an illusion, and so is the coloration in our facial features. In portrait painting, you only use 6 colors, and these are 6 very good colors to use. Some might disagree and say, well, I don't use that one, I use another one, but pretty much this is it. It's white, yellow lake, which is yellow, scarlet lake, which is red, yellow ochre, which is a light brown, burnt umber, dark brown, and ultramarine, which is blue, amazingly, which actually goes in to use skin color, and also obviously eye color. This picture here is from a very good artist called Sergei Gustyav, and he is in Russia. I don't know how he's doing, probably not very well, I would have thought. So, whispering from the deep past is my second topic, if you like. So when asked about the magic origins of the alphabet, the uninitiated, so this isn't a kind of professional reply, if you like, that the letters are probably derived from the drawings of the stars. And there is some understanding that there is truth to this. And it's a reminder of the archaic resonance of such signs. This quote is taken from a book. We've got the star sign on the right hand side. You've got the star sign of Ursula Minor as it's laid out in outer space, so to speak. On the bottom left of the screen, you can see, sorry, in the middle, you can see it says summer triangle. There are celestial triangles all across the night sky as we see it. And it turns out that the hexagon, which is actually just two triangles, one overlaid on top of the other, hexagram, or the Star of David, actually form all the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And I just wanted to, this is where I said I did hours and hours of research on this, and I just couldn't resist showing you that within the Star of David here, you have the Sephirot, or the tree of life. And around the tree of life, you have the flower of life. And this is a sort of magical sign, or egg of life. To some, it's got, you know, a whole cast of different meanings and ideas. But I just wanted to show you some drawings that I saw. This is Hilma af Klint. These 10 drawings are being sold at David Zwirner in London, and I had the pleasure of seeing them. This was when Hilma went to see Rudolf Steiner, and she gave him 10 drawings in order to, I think, attempt to persuade him of the legitimacy of her work. And the story goes, or this is what the Af Klint Foundation initially said, that he rejected her and he was rather horrible. But they're trying to kind of rework that story. And it turns out that the Steiner Foundation no longer, you know, are prepared to sell them, basically, which is what's just happened. Which is why they're sitting in a separate gallery. And you can see here on the right-hand side of this drawing, this is one of Hilma's atoms. And I've blown it up here, that inside of the atom, you can see the flower of life inside of her atom, which I just think is just wonderful. It's a beautiful description of, you know, how she valued and treasured life itself, which is a long way from this situation of Nazism and the development in this way. So we're talking about whisperings from the deep past and an archaic resonance, and the Nazi symbol itself is potentially considered to be an appropriation from Ursula Minor, but also obviously from the Nazi Party. Prior to Nazism, in the West, it was a symbol of auspiciousness and good luck. And it continues to be used as a symbol of divinity and spirituality in Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. It has huge, there are thousands of examples of this shape being used across Greco-Roman culture, even within you know, synagogues. And it's a star sign that was then appropriated for horrific uses. So how does this then relate to my work? The position became that I started to do the same thing, if you like, that I was appropriating images from the past. This is taken from a Fra Angelico angel, and in a kind of seminar at university, it came to my attention that the resonance of the Fra Angelico angel isn't necessarily the information that I'm trying to in part in my Wailing Wall. And obviously Fra Angelico was working in a very specific time of Christianity, and his beautiful paintings are about the times of his prayers. But I'm trying to create a different narrative, if you like, a different story. And so I've brought in the concept of Gilgul, which is a concept of reincarnation in Kabbalah. And basically that it's a very complicated idea, but rather than going into it in depth, perhaps I'm very happy to discuss it a bit later. But it comes down to the idea that because stones exist, that they actually possess a subtle form of soul. And I started to look into the stones themselves and walls, and probably a lot of people on this call will sort of say, oh, I see images in stones, I see faces all over the place. My daughter put me onto this, and in fact I noticed it's quite there I can't recollect the word, but there is actually a kind of notion of it in psychology of why we do that, a kind of anthropomorphism. But this is to actually discover the souls of the stones, and this is part of the painting. This is one of the souls within the stone. So I'm literally just taking the light and shade, the form of the stone to find the soul within it. And this again is part of the painting, where these sort of angelic-like forms, as we've been discussing previously, I use automatic drawing and painting as my method of creation, which is very typical, I think, of visionary artists. It's how we work with our hand almost being guided. And then finally, an idea of inner hauntings, and to return to this idea of intergenerational, and how Gobineau's writings led directly to the death of the little girl in Auschwitz, and that these intergenerational hauntings, this is actually almost in the emotional DNA. And I very much sense that. And again, this is a collage of mine. Sorry about the really poor quality of the image. I haven't yet had them photographed really nicely. But again, it's this beautiful, perfect landscape, and the poor and the little boy with his hands up in a concentration camp. And you can just imagine this sort of moment of this child's life, so unnecessary, being hounded by authorities. Again, the same little girl transported into a different landscape. The utopia of our beautiful world, and how we create such unnecessary pain within it. One of the statistics that really shocked me recently was that we've all heard the statistic that 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust, but 1 million of them were children, and how this resonates through history, this and resonates through our lives. I very much feel that, in the fact that I was born as I'm an only child to a mother who was also an only child, because her mother wouldn't have any more children because of what had happened to her. She'd experienced horrific things, basically, and that has a really powerful resonance within my life today. And here another child in place in a horrific state. You can see his poor little face, but but in another way, if this notion of racial supremacy wasn't taken, and in fact a different notion was adopted. In fact, I'm just going to take you back. I absolutely love this Kabbalistic notion that instead of evolutionism, that you've got creation as a continuous process of divine vitality, which would be a great replacement for Darwinianism, where you've got, you know, life itself being a divine vitality, and given the sort of treasure and respect which doesn't exist within scientific paradigm today. Life itself is not even there. So with that, I'm coming to an end. My website is www.degard.org. If you'd like to be in contact, I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like any further information about my work, I try and upload everything on there. And thank you very much. It's been an absolute honour to come and join you and share with you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Degard. It was so rich and moving. So much to discuss. We'll discuss it later. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I think it now falls to me to introduce Paul Dieppe, who I have to confess, Paul, I can't see you on my screen now, that I knew only vaguely of you before. You tell us that you're a retired doctor and Emeritus Professor, including Professor of Rheumatology in Bristol, Dean of the Faculty of Medicine in Bristol, and Director of the Medical Research Council's Health Services Collaboration. And you now work on healing with a multidisciplinary team of colleagues at Exeter University. But I have been looking at your writings, Paul, and I want to read to this gathering part of your article in Integrating Healing, which is a challenge, I think, a marvelous challenge. Modern biomedicine pays relatively little attention to illness and will have nothing to do with healing, and has no answers for the suffering that comes from societal problems such as loneliness, loss of identity, the loss of meaning in life, and alienation. That is a real challenge to biomedicine. And later on, you indicate that in that healing, you would want to include caring, connecting, feeling safe, but significantly creativity. And I think it's in the area of creativity and the absence of healing in biomedicine, but possibly in that you're going to talk to us today. I'm really looking forward. I was excited by this article, Paul, and I'm really looking forward for both me and all of us gathered to be able to get to know you more fully. Thank you so much.
June, thank you so much. That's very generous. Let me see if I can manage this screen share thing. Well, probably not. Probably not then. Let me just try again. Is that working?
Coming.
Yes. Okay,
yes.
Well, thank you again for...
Paul, could you just check that that if you move the screen on, that in this version, the slides are going to change?
Oh, no, they're not.
All right.
Oh, well, they might if I do that. I can manage if you just have to put up with seeing me. Okay.
Excellent. Good.
Sorry to be a bore with this. I'm not very good with technology. So thank you, June, and thank you, everybody. So I want to talk briefly about some of the work we've done on spirituality and healing. Just first, very briefly, who we are. As June says, I'm a physician by background. I'm now retired. But I work with a very multidisciplinary group, a performance scholar, a philosopher, a historian, a psychologist, and a doctor trained in North American healing techniques. So we are a genuinely interdisciplinary crowd, and we believe passionately that we need a combination of humanities and science to look into issues such as spiritual problems. Now, our work is about healing, and we take a phenomenological approach to it. to try to understand healing experiences. And of course, healing experiences often involve some form of spiritual experience, as James and others have talked about for centuries. But the methodological problem, in a sense, is how can we gain understanding of such experiences that people have? And I want to briefly talk about one method we've tried with this, which is an artistic method published a couple of years ago in a not very prestigious journal. And this is the protocol we've used. So in a variety of public spaces, we ask random members of the public if they can give us 5 minutes of their time for research. If they say yes, which they usually do, we give them some crayons, colored crayons and paper. Everybody likes playing with crayons and paper. And tell them that we'd like them to draw the first image that pops into their head when we pose a question, and to talk about what's happening while we record what they say. Then we pose the question and we put the recorder on and we see what happens. And the signing of consent takes place after the event, so that we don't prime them into starting to think about things, because we don't want them thinking about it before they draw. And largely people have been happy with this, as have our ethics committees. So the question that we've posed quite a lot with this work, we have done other sorts of things, but what does the word healing mean to you is the one I want to talk about. And when we pose that question, people will often start drawing while saying something along the lines of, I don't really know what I'm doing. I had this image that popped into my head. I don't know why. But then after a while, they say, oh, I see, that's what the image means to me. Oh, I see, I didn't realize that. That is actually what I think about healing. So it's as if they're sort of accessing something that they didn't know was there. Here's one example that I will remember of this sort of phenomenon. I asked this man the question, he picked up the crayons and he said, well, I seem to be drawing a garden. And now I seem to be drawing a pillow that's in the garden, and oh no, it's all indoors. It's inside, it's in my home. I don't know what this is, but that's my image of healing. Now, I suspect that a psychiatrist would have a field day with this man, and I don't pretend to completely understand what that was about, but it's an example of the way it conjured up something from deep within him that he wasn't aware of being there. But having said that, we've done this with over 100 people, and there are quite a lot of common themes and images, and I'll just briefly show you some of these if I may. So healthcare props up quite a bit. So here's someone's talking about a nurse comforting her dying mother with the drawing there, and she burst into tears while she did the drawing and seemed to get some cathartic response from it. Growth and development is a very common theme that people talk about healing as a form of growth and development, and this is one such image. Love is talked about a lot, and you might be able to see here that this the 14-year-old girl who drew this wrote also hands healing with love, with her image of the heart and the hands. Rather beautiful image, I think, from that 14-year-old. Nature comes up a lot. Here's one such image of nature with all sorts of things going on here, butterflies, the sun, things growing. Wholeness is another theme that comes up a lot, and people generally draw circles to represent wholeness, although that we have some other images that people said were about wholeness. So we've done qualitative analysis with these sort of data that's in the publication, but we think it's a very interesting technique for accessing understandings of spiritual concepts. Now, the other thing we've done with this material is with the help of an artist called Deborah Weinreb, who's a Bristol-based artist. We developed an exhibition about healing based on the material, which we've shown in 2 big general hospitals, as well as a variety of medical meetings. The title of the exhibition is How Are You Healing? Contrast, obviously, with the usual question of how are you feeling? And this is the title picture. And we used some of the most striking images that we had from the question, what does the word healing mean to you? Such as this fantastic one of a stethoscope on a tree. Quite a lot of people talked about the need to heal the world as opposed to heal people. And this is a picture of a hospital corridor with some of the exhibition material on it. It was down both sides of this big corridor. And this is some of the things. So we used quotations about healing with some of the images, as well as these multiple images put together around a particular theme. What we did then was to do a number of observational work, interviews and focus groups with staff, patients and visitors looking at these exhibitions in hospitals to try again and understand more about the conceptualization of healing. And the conclusions we've really come to from this work is that members of the public have very sophisticated and nuanced understandings of healing, which are far more spiritual and far more interesting than those of healthcare professionals, who tend to look a bit embarrassed if you ask them about healing and talk about wound healing or something of that sort. And the second major conclusion is that this sort of art-related methodology allows people to express and discuss their spiritual views around metaphor and to access aspects of their understanding and experiences that you can't easily get at by asking them a question or getting them to write something. So we think the methodology, using art as a methodology as opposed to expressing an idea but as a way of understanding ideas, is a very interesting aspect of exploration of spiritual events. So thank you again for the opportunity. If you want to contact me about any of this work or any of our other work on healing, that's my email address. So thank you. I'll see if I can stop sharing the screen. Oh, I've managed that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. A wonderful insight into the use of art as a methodology, as one who's done a lot on performances research. Not only what you find, but the way you found it, I think is extraordinarily exciting and challenges all the evidence-based and randomized controlled trials at its very heart. So thank you for that challenge. We've decided that we're all going to discuss all 3 together afterwards and see what the common threads are. So I'm going to hand over to Annalisa to introduce Nick.
Hi, yes, I'm introducing Nick and Maya. I think that their presentation is going to tie really well with Paul's. It's just going to be a bit getting us deeper into the spiritual dimension of the creative act, as well as Degard. So a couple of words about Nick and Maya. Nick was a career creative executive in the entertainment industry until he went through a spiritual emergence period in which art poured out of him. Now he's an intersubjective spaceholder with a focus on hosting, holding, and facilitating spaces that stimulate and hold emergent creativity in all forms. He received his training in collective presencing, emergent dialogue, next level facilitation, and PSI, psycho-spiritual integration. He is the co-founder of the practice of creative presencing, and he lives in Brooklyn and is a father of 2 daughters, which, you know, some personal information helps too. And then I believe that he co-founded the practice of creative presencing with Maya. Maya holds a BA in art education and PhD in transpersonal psychology. She has presented her insights on the nature of the creative process, spiritual awakening, and community development at the Science and Non-Duality and Non-Dual Wisdom and Psychology conferences. She's a former creative director of Open Gate Sangha, Adyashanti, co-founder of Creative Presencing, and the creator of the Divine Dice Oracle. She follows her passions to inspire, and awaken creative potential individually and collectively for the benefit of all. So over to you guys.
Thank you. If you just give me 1 second, I'm just going to screen share. 1 second, let's do that.
And while Nick is setting that up, I'll just say thank you so much for this warm and welcoming creative space to share our thing.
It's great to be here. Just before we kick off, because there's been quite a lot of content flowing, just like 10 seconds of just silence, just so we can all tune in and really fully arrive. Yeah, so yeah, thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here and really nice to see you all and to see the other presentations. And Maya and I today are going to do 15 or 20 minutes like this between the two of us. I'll talk a little bit about what is creative presencing as a practice, just how we developed it and how it works, top level. And then I'll hand over to Maya and she'll take us through one example of some art that was created in one session of creative presencing by a number of different artists simultaneously. So you'll have a little bit of the theory at the beginning or the praxis framework that we used, and then you'll see an example of it in practice. And what came from that harvesting, we call it harvesting, the art that comes from the practice out of the practice. So you'll see a little bit of art harvesting from this space. Just going to move the little thing on the screen. Yeah. So to explain it a little bit, we do it in groups. We practice in groups. And the people in the groups in which we do this are both artists of all stripes. So we have visual artists, poets, musicians, dancers, all kinds, singers in group settings. They're artists and practitioners of certain kinds of, you might have heard of the term we space practices, for example, but it's really practices where we bring a lot of presence to the space that's there in the circle of practitioners. And we almost ride the field of energy that's there in the presence. So it's a little bit like building energy in the circle and then surfing on the energy creatively together. You could say it's not like we're all making one work of art together, but we're all making art from the togetherness that's there. And the space, you can feel it here now already, just in that 10 seconds of silence, you could feel it build between us in the room here. There's a sort of space between us all. Or think of us as spread all over the world right now. And yet we are here in this room together. And yet there is a feeling to this, a feeling tone to this room that we're in, this virtual room. And that's a space between us. And that has a quality. And we call that the intersubjective field. And the more we pay attention to it and sort of speak into it and from it, the more it builds, almost like energy. And what we're doing when we do that as creative presencing practitioners is we're feeling into what we call the artist in the middle. We're feeling into what, as the individual artist in their own process will often sense into what wants to emerge through them in the work of art. We're doing that into an intersubjective space between us. What wants to come through this circle of people in this moment right now? What is the middle trying to birth through us creatively? And when we do that practice, it's a dialogical practice. So we talk around a question, a sort of, we think of it as almost like a psychoactive question. It's almost like the ayahuasca of the space is the question, if you will, that activates the space. And we always use the same question stem. And that's, what does the field want us to know about? And then we, in this particular practice, we use a divinatory practice, which Maya developed as a creative practice using dice. So I'll just show you an example of that, and then I'll show you the question that we used for this particular session. So we'd say, what does the field want us to know about blank? And then I'll just give the floor to Maya for a second to show you an example of that working.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. So also I'll say that we do a thing that we might call a bridge of silence, as a way, just the way Nick invited us just for a few seconds of silence together. Before I roll the dice, I invite the group to have a minute of silence. And the idea is to tune into the dice together. And that's also a way to bring our collective presence in a way focused around one intention, and the invitation to invite the field of us to be present with the roll of the dice, in a way to have the mystery be part of our process. And so now I invite our field right now to speak to us through this roll. And then we have a word list that I refer to, and we have a 3, a 7, and a 16. And so our question, if we were going to do this process today, is, what does the field want us to know about the deep flow of relationship? What does the field want us to know about the deep flow of relationship? And then as a group, we would take another minute of silence. And I invite you to just consider what images, what thoughts come up for you right now when you consider, what does the field want us to know about the deep flow of relationship? And then the invitation would be to be in a meditative, contemplative dialogue together. And I'll pass it on to Nick.
Exactly. And we would talk around that question, feeling into it. We talk about tentacular sensing, almost like an octopus with its tentacles. We kind of lay on the question and just feel into what wants to emerge. We use it's an embodied dialogue practice. So we're using all our senses, not just our minds, to think about that and feel into it. And then we'll start to make art as we dialogue together. And then we'll harvest the art at the end, and we'll look at it together and listen to it together and look for commonalities. And so in a second, what I'll do is hand back to Maya just to give one example of that. So this was from a session that we did end of 2020. There were maybe 10 of us in the room, different kinds of artists, and the dice roll revealed this question: what does the field want us to know about the luminous purpose of the unknown? And yeah, we did the practice. It's maybe 90 minutes or 2 hours. And so as I hand over to Maya, she's going to talk a little about the art that emerged, but as well, it's a re-invocation, you could say, of what it felt like to be in that session, which was quite mysterious. It blew our minds, actually, when we did it.
Thank you, Nick. And I invite you to also co-reflect on this with me. Here are some of the images that were produced by those of us in the space together. And you can see how, without trying, we came up with a beautiful pattern unfolding. There was an image that was spoken into the space of the golden bowl, and also that sense of was it a black hole kind of thing? And so you can see by looking at these images, this continuity that reflects that we were all tuning into something together. And I don't know if you can see some of the detail. There's like a DNA intertwining kind of movement. And there was a sense that came forward really strongly that we were like creating a satellite dish in a way to receive information together. And that is reflected in that, particularly in that last image. We can't see it very well. I wonder if we should go to the next slide, where there's a group of people basically in a circle and tuning into that deep awareness together. Nick, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I would add also, the feeling definitely was of us becoming some kind of a radar dish, as Maya said, and that the thing that was trying to communicate with us was from deep space. It was like a cosmic connection that was being established from a point of origin somewhere in deep space. And at a certain moment in the group, we all said, oh, wow, was that a ping from space? Did you hear that? Like, was that an actual noise that came from space? It was very strange and mysterious, and had a quality of interstellar communication. And I was just taken off guard in the first presentation today that there was a reference to human semiotics having come from stellar origins. And I just find that quite interesting that that was also present in this space. And I'll talk about another synchronicity to this space at the end of this presentation as well. But yeah, we weren't so much, you wouldn't have known that this amount of coherence of imagery was happening in the session because we were all drawing privately and making poetry, which we'll read in a second, and music. But when we looked at it all afterwards, we had all experienced a sliver of the same thing, which I would say was interstellar contact, if I had to give a name to it. Yeah. Back to you, Maya.
Yeah, and what's even striking me now is that while we, I'm sure, have all in different moments of our lives experienced that coherent sense in a group, to have it be visually represented, it's like, yeah, we were all on the same page there. And we have sort of proof, let's say. And even as Nick and I were preparing this presentation for you and arranging these images, it wasn't until that moment that we recognized that golden bowl on the side there as, oh, that's like a lens of the eye, like a contact lens or the lens of the eye. And how does that even, it's like this mystery unfolding from that group sensing that brought these beautiful symbols together. So I'm going to read the poem that the poet in this space wrote from this session. What is the luminous purpose of the unknown? Gravity bending light, an echo listens. This ripple born in stillness will return and give shape to the edge. Sonar blips in the distant, light years between heartbeats. The echo's eventual return. Something like a sunrise inside a golden singing bowl. mystery. The dust in our corners sparkles like a raven's wing. The dark brilliance in the center of our eyes. Gravity pulls at the edges of our question. Darkness holds the edges of light. A cold winter morning. Now, even the darkness bows gracefully. Our quest to touch the unknown.
And thank you. And in the harvest, it wasn't just art that people were, their own original works, they were also adding in imagery, and you'll see that on the left. And there was this very particular image that was like a black circle in space. It was like the point of origin that we'd sensed into. And there were probably a dozen images like the ones on the left. And as we were harvesting, unbeknown to us, within the week of the group, in the sky, there was a total solar eclipse happening at the same time. And when we saw the images on TV of the solar eclipse, we were all saying, did you see those images? That's exactly what we were seeing in the group and drawing a week ago. And none of us referenced it or knew that it was happening until afterwards. And we built the actual harvest frame, which was quite remarkable. We started to see the resonance between the imagery from the sky. And then also as I was saying a second ago, synchronistically, 4 days from now, there is a total lunar eclipse this weekend. It's going to come, and they're quite rare events. So there is actually a time portal significance between when this happened, this event, and now. And I didn't know that wasn't planned into this. It wasn't until I looked when the presentation was finished at the sky and said, oh, wow, look at that. There's going to be another eclipse in 4 days. That's quite remarkable. And the final thing is I just want to play a piece of music that was composed in the session as well, same session, that has like the poem obviously tries to summarize the feeling, the images, and then this is a musician in the session as well. Again, you can, when we heard the music, we all said, yeah, atmospherically, that was what was happening. And it's also in the words and the art. So there's the harvest. Thank you for your time and attention. That's the end.
And I'd like to add a few more thoughts on that. That interesting, some of the things that Paul was sharing reflected that sense of, oh, we don't know what it means until we draw it kind of thing. And that my experience, and I think the experience of others in the groups, was that it was a healing process of doing this together. And it healed not only certain people had huge creative openings by participating in it, and the healing of community, the healing of that sense we can co-create, we can be in coherence with each other. And in that shared experience, a sense of community building, a sense of belonging was coming up. And one more thing, it was also very like psychoactively powerful for some people. And from our first session, there was one person in particular who had so deeply taken on a role of sort of channeling energy. And we realized that it's now part of the practice to do what we call de-rolling. And so it's a very simple closing to our session, and I'll just do that briefly now. It's just basically inviting gratitude to the field for our time together, and then taking in a breath and receiving all that is yours to nourish you on the next step of your journey. And as you breathe out, release anything that's not yours to take with you. Breathe in, receive the nourishment. Breathe out and let go of whatever isn't yours to take forward. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Nick and Maya. It was a very powerful presentation. The images, I mean, I think that's all you need in the sense as evidence. The fact that, you know, we can write and talk as much as we want about this kind of experiences. And I think having images, actual material images that from the mind are put on the paper is the closest we're going to get to any material evidence of what's happening at a psychic level. I am probably the least qualified person to comment on all of the presentations we had today. So I would like to basically open up to the floor to anyone who wants to share thoughts about the presentations or add their own experiences that might complement what we've already heard. I think the diversity of approaches and experiences is one of the positives of this initiative. It's really about sharing knowledge, sharing experiences, and finding answers if somebody is looking for answers.
So either put questions in the chat or put your hand up, or either electronically or in real bodily shape. Any questions, comments, experiences that people would like to share? I was very fascinated, Nick, with Nick and Maya. So often artistic creation is seen as an individual act, and the lonely artist sitting on their own in a studio, or the lonely musician, as I am, with a piano, working it all out. The notion of that sense of communal creation, I think it was very exciting, and challenges that lonely image of the lonely artist, often, of course, suffering from the loneliness that art demands of them in order to create. So I think it was very interesting. Mia, you have your hand up.
Before Mia asks that question, could I just say something about what June just said? It's very interesting, June, that is, I didn't feel as if we removed any of the artists' individual, essential, authentic creative process either. It wasn't either or, it was both. Both were really working. When it was working, both were really working at full speed. And it was as if the group experience was fueling the individual creative experience. And then in turn, they were flowing that back into the collective experience. It was quite dynamic when it worked, yeah. It was very,
of course, that's what's true of jazz in music.
It was very like jazz improv.
Jazz
improv is an analogy we used all the time, yeah. That's very right, yeah, it's very true. Yeah.
And I'd like to also emphasize what Nick put in the chat there, that the collective presencing developed by Ria Beck was really the foundation of the container that we had for the group. So as artists, we could meet in that space that really supported the collective process. Yeah, Mia.
Oh.
Hi, yeah, I didn't really have a question yet, but I just wanted to say I'm so, yeah, just, wow, you know, these presentations have kind of blown my mind a bit. I'm just resonating with them on so many different levels. Yeah, so just sort of extend some gratitude for all the work that's gone into everything behind these presentations, and thank you so much for sharing everything.
Thank you. Over to Sheila then, I think, with a hand up.
Thanks. This past Saturday was World Labyrinth Day, And all across the globe, people walk the labyrinth as a form of labyrinth activism, subtle labyrinth activism for world transformation. My question has to do with this. I would like to use the labyrinth myself, but as a pre and perinatal psychology education or learning tool of how our origin stories can impact the rest of our lives. When you're working within a container, like an archetypal or alchemical symbol like the labyrinth, then you have a whole other layer of containment. How do you keep those, or do you let them like as if you could control it? How do they blend? And then how do you make it a clean experience so that if a person is tapping into their own collective or their own personal origin story and doing healing, and then also doing a collective at the same time, how do you dance that dance?
Anyone like to offer insight? I can see Nick nodding. I don't know whether, Paul, you want to add anything to that with your work with creativity and in that area. You need to unmute.
Yes, I think I've managed that. Well, it's a tricky question, isn't it? I mean, I just got a couple of comments in relation to that question and to the last lovely presentation, if I may. The first is that I think that healing is always relational and always reciprocal. So that healing is about a relationship which might well be with a stone or a tree or another person or whatever it is that's outside of us, but it's always relational and it's reciprocal if it's between people that, and of course groups of people, as Nick and Maya have been talking about, extremely powerful healing experiences because of the, if you like, the extra amount of access to the ineffable. So I've now actually forgotten what the question was, so I think I should probably shut up now.
Round about containment and the labyrinth.
Yes. Well, I also think that what techniques people use to access the ineffable and to create spiritual transformation doesn't really matter very much. It's much more to do with the intention. So I think you can use the labyrinth, if you like, as a source of intention, just as you can use music or poetry or visual art or whatever. As long as the intentionality is there, I think that's the key to it, probably.
Thank you, Paul. I wanted to add something to Degard's notion of the ensoul, that stones are ensouled in some way, because there's a whole movement in biopsychism, which is looking at in that area. And I have been playing yesterday. I have a machine called the Sound of the Plants, and that puts connectors onto the leaves of the plants and turns the vibrations within the plants into sounds. And we were improvising with these sounds, the harpist, the guitarist, and me, and the plants. So we were improvising with a yew tree, we're improvising with a beautiful rock plant, and so on. So I think biopsychism and this notion of the ensouling of the entire universe, I mean, artists, in a sense, we saw with Degard how she's done that, but we musicians have started to look technologically at how we might use that to actually compose with the plants and so on. So I think there's a whole area of developing from the notion of the ensoulment of the entire universe, not just human beings. So I just wanted to add that to the debate, really.
Yeah, I would like.
Come in.
I would like to also add to Degard about the racial theories in relation to the arts. It's just something, it's really interesting because I just discussed it with my students a few days ago, and I wonder if Degard knows, I'm sure she does, that we looked at the color theory of the Theosophical Society, in particular, Leadbeater and Annie Besant, and apparently Leadbeater was, in his books you can read about his extremely racial attitude to race. He's got his own racial theory, and he looks at the color and the auras in relation to race. And it was also inspired by Madame Blavatsky, who was also had some ideas about who's superiors and who's less superior. So that I just think that this is something quite interesting in terms of art history and art theory, and the evolution of the spiritual and the visionary in art. So I think it's really an interesting point.
Thank you. Yes, you're absolutely right that some of the foundational ideas in Theosophy are about highers and lowers. There's a lot of supremacist ideas of higher intellects, and also even the notion of spirituality itself, that if you are a theosophist, you automatically you're reaching higher realms. I really don't agree. Being a visionary artist, being connected to the visionary is embedded inside, it's part of who I am. But I don't know that I'm as a result, I wouldn't claim to be a higher being as a result, not a chance.
I think that
wonderful.
These theories was just at the very beginning of the century. And
they need revising. They really do.
But they're still around now.
Oh, very influential.
And I know that you were rather condemnatory of Darwin, but I think Darwin has been misused, and I think Darwin would be quite sad at some of the usage that his evolutionary theories have been put to. And as many of us, when we put things out there, what people have done with them, we get a bit upset. Alison wants to come in on this debate. Unmute, Alison.
Yeah. Sorry, it's not really a continuation of what's been said before in this particular thread. So if anyone wants to respond immediately to the last speaker, please do. I've just got something I'd like to share about a collaborative artist practice that I'm involved with, which relates to the last presentation.
Yes, do. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So it was, it's a different process, but something that I've been involved with since about 2008, which was a group of artists, 5 of us, 3 in the USA, me in the UK, and 1 in Israel. And it was a very simple process we did together, not as a simple process of, we all came from a kind of, had a spiritual context which we were working in, a kind of sense of the ground of being, an experience of intersubjective space, emergent dialogue. But we had a very simple process of each making a mark on a small piece of paper, and we started off very simply with a pencil mark or black and white, no colour, and we would rather laboriously, because we were in different locations, it wasn't done simultaneously, but within a period of, say, a few days, we would upload the images to the web, download them, print them out, add to them, upload them, print them out. So by the end, there were 5 people who had kind of contributed to an image which kind of produced something that none of us would have been able to produce by ourselves. So it's quite a simple process, but as we did it over the years, we would also have telephone conference calls. We didn't have Zoom at the time, so deep listening, intersubjective field that we all shared. And it was a wonderful process. It was, you know, the exploration of a creative process beyond the individual. And then we stopped doing that about a few years ago. And I tried, I have now, we've got a group of people who would not consider themselves to be spiritual. In fact, would probably be quite hostile to the idea, but they're artists. So a group of artists in the UK, that we do the same process. But I think there is, without it being overt in any way, people talk about, you know, this creative, just a stream of creative energy that they hadn't accessed through their own individual art, a sheer delight and care, and a kind of deeper resonance and listening between artists. So, and for each person, it's quite an unusual experience, because, as you say, until then, each artist had only been their own, you know, expressing their own stuff individually in a quite a psychological framework. So anyway, thank you. It's very interesting to hear about the creative presencing. I really would like to find out more about that.
Annalisa.
Yes, I'm fascinated by this idea of group creative process, because I've just read a paper in anthropology, and it was written by an American Indian who was part of this creative group of Indian Americans who were invited, well, they asked to be present at the Venice Biennale. I think it was 2019, I'm not sure now. And this idea, and one of the problems, so the Indian American culture is a culture of collectivity, and so they wanted to create something for the Biennale as a collective. However, this created problems. Once they arrived at the Biennale, it created problems with the mainstream way that we look at art because of the issue of authorship. And this is an interesting problem, I think, for the art world on one hand, and for artists such as you, maybe me too, who would like to perhaps do more participative work with other artists as a collective, but the art world is just not ready, so to speak, to receive a work where it cannot be attributed to anyone in particular. So that's an interesting discussion to have among artists, and perhaps also with, you know, this group in particular. I see Lila nodding a lot.
Yeah, because it is very interesting. And I just want to say that I participated in what is called like cyber performance and network performance. And it is really a wonderful collaborative. And Nick, you know, I mean, I have a lot to say in this regard in relation to Maya and your work, but it felt that we were all creating it together. Obviously we did, but the credit went to the person who had the concept, the original idea. But we had our names attached to it, which I felt is fair enough. And sometimes it's okay, to just kind of share. And each artist can do their own performance or their own idea and work with others, and then get the credit and then include the participants. But I understand what you're saying at the same time.
But I think what you're saying is that art is political, and that what we're doing here is challenging the dominant political and ideological systems that we have. Because, as Annalise has pointed out, the indigenous peoples in general would have individual ownership as a completely ridiculous idea anyway.
Yes, it is.
So we're looking in the political area. I think that I know people have got other things to do, and we need to shut this beautiful discussion down.
It was going.
I know it's just going, but but what I was going to say was this, that we've been given the new date, July the 13th, and we do need 3 provocations from that. And I know some people may have provocations which have been provoked by this lot of provocations, which is how it all works, really. I know that Aaron, you were almost invited before everybody joined to put one of those in. As a musician and a performing artist, and we have terrible trouble with ownership because we're always creating communally. So it does generate in our culture an awful lot of lawsuits, I'm afraid. Some of you may have been part of who took which bit and so on and so forth. So I think these are wonderful ideas that are around. And what we've had today, I think, is a bringing together of perhaps 2 strands in INSS of the arts as art and the arts as healing. And the spirituality involved in both of those. And Annalise and Leela asked me to tell one last story and before we close to circle. And it's a lovely Jewish story of the 4 rabbis who went up to heaven and saw the 7th heaven and then came back to earth. One of them turned it into a religion and bored everyone with his sermons. One person went mad and wandered around the desert foaming at the mouth. One person said nothing happened, it was just a stupid thing. But the other one was a singer of songs, a drawer of picture and a teller of tales. And he turned his spiritual experience into stories, tales and pictures. And the world was a richer place by using that spiritual experience in that way. And I think we've had wonderful examples of how people have done that today. And I'm hoping that at the next time we should be together to carry on this discussion and to learn from one another, from our experiences. So thank you very much for everyone who's presented, and thank you very much for everyone who's joined the discussion. And please find some more provocations for us. And if there aren't performing artists here, please go and provoke your performing artists into a provocation. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Fight the power.
Going last, so I'm staying here if anyone wants to keep talking.
Let's just stay for a little while.
I have a quick question. I showed up late and got my time zones mixed up. Where will these recordings be available so I can see the presentation?
Yeah, so I'm going to ask actually INSS if we can post them on their YouTube channel. If not, we'll just post them on YouTube as separate from the INSS, but it will be posted in. We will send the link in an email.
Okay, greatly appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other people wanted to add anything at all?
Aaron, you didn't speak. I'm so disappointed. You're muted.
Yes, I was fascinated, and I loved every presentation. I found that I related to all three. I am a canvas painter, and I choose to express myself that way. And most recently, but also Paul's healing. I've always approached art in a healing manner. I think when people are accessing that part of themselves in a deeper level and being able to express it, it's inherently healing. And I teach that in my classes. And he also mentioned something about intention. And if you live your life in an intentional way, and it's a spiritual daily practice, and if you're an artist or create anything and you have an intention of spirituality in there, it's a healing intrinsically. And I think that's what the world needs. I think that's what modern medicine is lacking. And so whenever, in my style of teaching of painting, I always have someone think of something they love or something they cherish in their heart. It makes them happy. And then I have them paint that, and I teach fluid art, and that's a very fast way of painting. So a lot of paint can hit the canvas, and expression can happen very quickly, and that encapsulates that feeling. And I often teach in my classes that if they can come back to this feeling through their art that they actually create in this moment, I pass as a teacher. I give myself high marks, and that is the goal, is that for them to create a piece of healing art for them that's inherently organic and authentic to themselves, and come back to it and come back to that feeling when they look at it as almost a portal to this moment. That is a good grade for me as a teacher. And I'm trying to spread this. And a lot of people also today talked about cosmically, or in the stars, there's a philosophy known as Starseeds. And I don't know how much we want to talk about this, but if you're not familiar with the philosophy of a starseed, it's souls that have reincarnated on Earth, that have come from other places around the galaxy to actually teach. And there's a definitive internal drive within them to share love and light, and mainly through art. And so I feel like a lot of us in the room here are them, myself included. And I would highly recommend checking that out if you're interested in learning more about that philosophy. But I feel like today was amazing. I'm so honored and happy to be here and share my experience. I often paint blindfolded. I feel like when you are with your eyes closed, sometimes when you meditate or when you're looking intrinsically instead of externally, you really start to see and feel. And that's where I think that true artistic creative spark comes from. And I try to, hold space. I think a lot of people here holding space for a collaborative effort. I often teach in groups of up to 4. Sometimes it's one-on-one, but often it's a group. And the group is very specific. They come as a group, they paint as a group. Everyone has an individual painting, but there is definitely a collective feel. And so I loved everyone's presentation. I definitely related to all of it, and I'm going to take it into my teachings going forward. So thank you so much.
Thank you for accepting my invitation, because I really hoped you came. So maybe we'll see you next month then.
Yes, I would love to.
Okay. And I was also thinking, if you can invite some of your buddies, the light painters, that would be great.
I'm not sure everyone in the light painting community has a spiritual approach.
No, only the ones. Do you remember the one that you interviewed from Australia?
Yes, I will ask. Yes, I will ask him. Yes.
He said he went into a meditative space when he was doing light painting.
Yes. It's inherently meditative when you're just painting with light, because I think we associate as human beings life and light. We have the sun, and so it gives us light, it gives us life, it makes things grow. And so when you're actually being able to paint people's auras or paint in that state of light and with light, and having them most importantly be seen from an artist as a subject, you're actually being seen in that lighted figure, almost angelic. It's quite powerful and transformative to the subject, to the person being painted. And I like to share that as often as possible.
Of course, one of the subjects were eclipses, which is changes in the light, isn't it? Where one light obliterates another light and so on. Interestingly, I chose to wear today this pendant, which is actually of a lunar eclipse. And I realized that there were plenty of people talking about, you can see the sun and the moon on the pendant itself and so on. But the eclipse, in a sense, is an interesting one in the notion of light, isn't it? And the relationship between two forms of light.
I'd like to stretch the concept of performance and need a little clarity on the work that I'm hoping to do with this. The idea of performance as being embryonic does not come from me. It's from an embryologist that I've been studying. And he maintains that the gestures and the growth gestures and the movements that are observable during embryogenesis is a performance that's telling us something. So if I take people into a labyrinth, which mimics the 4 developmental stages broken up into 4, is that performance in itself, just walking the labyrinth with that kind of mindset that they're walking back into their origin story and then having them do art around that, then that for sure is performance art. Is that correct, or do I have that wrong?
According to performance theory, you are correct. It is a performance because it is performative work.
But the problem for us is that performance has also become devalued. A performance is often seen as being the antidote to truth. So it's performance, but it's not true. And many performance artists would be very upset about that. It's merely a performance, people will say, putting down, and that's where all of these forms of art, I suppose it goes back to what is truth, which is the ultimate question. And our society has put truth in words, and only things which can be put into words are true. But all of us here would say that there's a truth in whatever expression or performance we want to do. And I was interested in the presencing people, that they had situated that in a ritual. It was surrounded in a ritual. And, some of you may notice I'm wearing a collar, and I am a priest. So one of my tasks is ritual. And people, I say that all ritual is performance, that when I do all the movements I have to do, it's a performance. And then people say, oh, well, that means you don't believe it. But all of this playing out of whether performance is true, authentic, and so on, I think what you said is profoundly important for our society, because I would regard what I'm doing as both performed and true. So I think what's been interesting about this session is it's raised things far beyond art, about politics, about truth, about how we see what is true, what is authentic, what is not. And I think there are profound philosophical questions. And the one that you've asked, Sheila, is a very profound one, isn't it? It's an interesting question, because art therapists, for example, would say that I've just bought a piece that was made by a person in art therapy. Nobody has ever asked to buy her things before, because they were simply therapy. They weren't artistic pieces. She was amazed that somebody would want to buy something that she had done as a piece of art therapy. So there's another sort of strange little interface here.
Yeah.
And I think they're profound questions for us.
Thanks. Erin, are you familiar with the frog face from Tufts University, the bioelectricity that they recorded?
I am not. I would love to, though.
Okay, it's the frog face, Tufts University, and you'll see that the bioelectricity goes all through the embryonic, and where it happens, the body actually anatomically takes form.
Oh,
well,
wow.
Sheila, I don't know whether you know, Hildegard of Bingen in the 12th century wrote the first description of the notion of the development of the fetus, with no, of course, x-rays or anything. And she describes the soul wanders around the body inside the womb. And it says the moment of birth is when the soul is completely infused. And once it's in every limb of the body and everywhere, then that's the time that birth will happen. But she says it's a wonderful description, piece of poetry. She said the soul wanders around the fetus like a caterpillar spinning silk.
Oh, I love it. I'd love for you to be able to give me the citation for that. I'd love to use that because I'm working with the 12th century Chartres Cathedral. So,
are you?
Yeah.
Well, I've written a book on Hildegard in which where that is, and I have walked the labyrinth. I walked the labyrinth in Chartres in the dark and sang the hymn to the Virgin in the middle of the labyrinth, in the middle of the night. And it, of course, is the cathedral of birth. It's the only cathedral, I think, in the entire, which has no tombs. It only has the shroud in which Mary apparently may have wrapped Jesus.
Right.
So it's a birth cathedral, not a death cathedral.
Exactly. June, is that readily available in the States, or do I need to go to Amazon UK?
What, the book?
Yes.
It should be on Amazon, but I'm putting my email in the chat at the moment for you. Okay, great. So that you can do that. It's called The Creative Spirit, Harmonious Living with Hildegard of Bingen.
Oh, great.
It was published in 2000. And I suspect there are lots of secondhand copies knocking around, I expect.
All right. I don't see your email. Maybe it's not.
I'm just putting it in now.
Okay. Thank you so much.
But I think you see it, that's the lecture I'm giving in Portugal, and this is why the evolution thing I think is so dangerous. But in this sort of process, we've lost as much as we've gained. And people say, when I talk about Hildegard, she was ahead of her time. I say, no, she wasn't. She was part of her time. And we lost a lot of the things that she knew about along the way, the so-called Enlightenment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I one thing that I hoped you repeated today, June, was your explanation of how art is a way of anchoring the spiritual experience or the spiritual emergencies that, for instance, Nick had at a time where he didn't know what it was.
Yes, we didn't get into that, did we?
No, but it was a very, like, I was waiting for you to come in and say something because it really linked the three presentations together in a really sophisticated way.
I think the danger of the spiritual experience is that it isn't anchored and that it does need, and what art does is to anchor it in some shape or form. And that was the interesting debate about, I think it was you, Sheila, who raised it, in fact, the debate about containers and containment and all of that. But I think, and this is where I would go along with Degard, that a lot of the stuff that we've got now about consciousness, the evolution of consciousness, of people who have higher consciousness and all of that, is very dangerous, because the danger of those people is that it's not rooted down. I mean, I can be honest, in this smaller group, every morning I go barefoot into my garden, whether it's cold, hot, wet or dry. I know I need to do that because that actually puts my body in touch with the earth. And roots it down in some way, and our society has got so hooked on the sky and everything's up there, evolution, spirituality up there, that it's lost touch with the earth. And that's how the hierarchy developed, that up is good, down is bad. Well, why shouldn't down be good and up bad? I mean, so it's an interesting theme.
Yeah.
I think we should probably close the session now. I'm going to stop the recording. I think we had a very good conversation.